And what would you say, if you think back through your journey, and we've spoken briefly about your journey to here, what would be some of the milestones that you think that's the point where my leadership changed?
Definitely when I started running Women in Leadership for The Guardian, and I actually just got this huge insight into why we behaved the way we did, because up until that point I'd thought, honestly and truly, and I can say this, I thought the reason there weren't that many women at the top was because they dropped out of their own choice. And then I started to look at the stats, and I started to read the psychology behind it, and I started to understand the management structures behind it, and I realized this is not women dropping out, this is women being pushed out and not knowing how to get back in again. And so that was really interesting for me, and it really made me start to see not just the relationship between men and women differently, but actually diversity as a whole differently, and how we really address that and the structures within that. So that was the first one. I think the second one for me was when I actually had like a kind of, I don't call it a breakdown, but a mini breakdown about this, because I was like, I don't know, I've now got all this information and I don't know what to do with it. So I actually spent a good bit of time actually doing some therapy around that, doing some coaching around it, really looking at who I was as a person and why and where my behaviour came from, and then being like, okay, not just what is my behaviour, but what is the experience that other people have of me? And is that the experience I want them to have? And if it's not, what do I need to change, and what really is my purpose in this world? Because I do think when we're living our true purpose, when we're doing the stuff that motivates and inspires us, we can move mountains and change the world around us.
And so from what you were saying, it seems to be that you believe that there's a part of this that we can control, that we're responsible for. What are your thoughts on the parts that we don't control, that others are responsible for?
Oh, that we should just smash them. So there's always a part of your life that you can control, and there's always a part of your life that somebody else will control. And that's just, nobody can change that. Whatever circumstance that you are, however high or low up the food chain you are, that is life. The really important thing is about not feeling overwhelmed or insecure or angry or frustrated about that bit that you can't control. Instead, taking a step back from it and looking at it and saying, okay, well, what influence do I have here? What change can I make here? That said, we really need more men to understand this, and that's really hard. I think for men, they see it very much as a win-lose argument. So they see if we promote more women, then we have to demote more men. I don't think that at all. I think it's actually you just promote the best people, and you start looking outside what that really thin criteria of people has been up until this point. I also think that actually when we have more women and we start to change the workplace, and we start to question why do we work in the way that we do, why do we reward in the way that we do, actually that's going to really change society for men too. We're actually really lucky as women that we get a forum to talk about this stuff, that we get space to say the things that we're worried about and we're concerned about and we want to change. Most men don't get that opportunity, and so I'm really passionate about actually giving them the space to think, is this how I want my life to be? Or is this just what society's told me it should be? And I think when we do that, we'll start to see structures change as well.
So I've been reading recently about your work and your writing on hashtag She Persists.
Yes.
Or She Persisted. Can you tell me a bit about what was going on when you were thinking about that?
So She Persisted is a hashtag that actually came from an incident that happened in the US Senate. So Senator Elizabeth Warren was speaking against the nomination of a guy called Jeff Sessions to the US Attorney's Office. And as part of it, she read out a letter from Martin Luther King's widow about Jeff Sessions and her views on him. And she was stopped by a Republican senator. And the Republican senator said it was inappropriate, that she shouldn't be reading this woman's words, that criticizing the US Attorney wasn't okay. And his exact line was, I think he said, she was warned, she received an explanation, and she persisted. And for me, I was like, well, that is really the history of women in a sentence there. We forget, we're very lucky in the Western world that we have rights and privileges as women, but we forget we've really only acquired those rights and privileges in the last 50 years, and that actually for the majority of those of the world, those rights do not exist. They just don't. So actually as a woman, speaking out is still an act of courage. For most women in the world, saying what you think could potentially lead to violence, incarceration, even death. And so we have to, as women, persist in giving our view. We have to persist in pointing out stuff that is not fair and is not right. We have to persist in pointing out the structures and parts of society that are set up to denigrate us or to make life difficult for us. we have to keep doing that because there are women around the world who can't. And until every woman around the world has the same right to speak up without fear, we're not living in a fair society.